From Coordinate Sports, it's The Drive Phase, a show about sports founders, leaders and experts and the stories behind their business journeys. Welcome to the 50th anniversary episode and our 5th wrap-up show, bringing together the best insights from our previous episodes and a great opportunity for us to reflect on our aim of bringing added value to our listeners and to the wider sport and physical activity community. We've taken this chance to reflect on our last group of conversations and selected clips covering a range of key topics, showcasing key takeaways, insights, and their journeys. Our guests have passed on their experience so you can fast track your growth. Welcome to this week's episode of the Drive Phase podcast and part 5 of the Lessons from Leaders series. Enjoy the show. Lisa Wainwright talks us through her approach to change management, while Nigel Miller, Catherine Morley, and Jeff Thompson share their leadership philosophies with us.
It really depends on the type of organisation you're going into. So when I went into volleyball, I was recruited because the organisation wanted to change. Likewise with the Alliance, I was recruited for specific skills of changing the organisation. So for me, if you've got the backing of the board that are saying, we want you to change things, that's great. But as you say, there are thousands and thousands of volleyballers out there that are really happy with the way volleyball is. There's also thousands that aren't happy. If you think about cricket scenario at the minute, everybody's happy with cricket, and then the 100 comes along, there's a whole new world happy with the 100.
It's a different sport also, yeah.
Still, yeah. Same as beach volleyball, sitting volleyball, indoor volleyball. So for me, it was making sure that and I've always done this in every sport I've been in, you roadshow it, you go around the country, you meet those people who coach, who referee or umpire day in, day out, you listen to them, and from what they are telling you, you try to identify what that vision could be. And from that, you start to pull together that strategy in terms of the sport. You then go back and you reiterate and you continue like a broken record to talk about what that vision is and what their role is within it. And that's where success has come. For me, you have to have a success fairly early on if you're going to transform something. It takes years to transform something, but you've got to have some success. And ours at volleyball was this National Volleyball Centre had been talked about for absolute years. Nothing had happened. And within 6 months, we'd launched and opened the National Volleyball Centre, fully funded and operating. So everybody talks about it.
Yeah, and I guess that gives that impression you mean business, you can get things done, so people are more likely to follow.
But you have to take people with you. But, sometimes you can't. And sometimes you have to accept that, from a leadership point of view, you can't please everyone. And I always say, most of us don't like change. I hate change personally being put upon me. I love it in a work environment. And you will always get the naysayers who could go either way, but you will get some people that absolutely adamantly hate what you're doing. And there will be people in volleyball that still will say, shouldn't have had a National Volleyball Centre, shouldn't have done this, shouldn't have increased the funding by 4 million, shouldn't have done this. That will always be the case. But if the majority are going with you, then that's, for me, the transformation that you need to take.
So I think in terms of my personal style, I'm accessible and I'm visible. And actually the hardest thing for me has been over the last year, 18 months, I'm pretty much sat behind a big screen talking to people over the screen. And so you're visible in a different way. And I was listening to the radio on the way in this morning and people saying about, the water cooler moments that you just miss by not being in an office. And we know there's an awful lot of gossip and junk goes on around chit-chat in an office, but you do just pick up and learn, see and understand things from being together physically. So for me, very much, I will get back to, and I'm still trying to be like, I'm very accessible, but I want to, I like to be very visible so people can, and approachable so people can talk to you and find out. Sometimes that annoys my MDs because you are like, you'll pop up somewhere and you go, oh, so-and-so's just said this to me, and you go, oh, bloody hell, they don't know what they're talking about, is this? But they do, ultimately, and I know, because I've had it where I've got bosses who are asking you stuff and it can irk you at times, but you've just got to, I think, take some of that on the chin. So being open and accessible. I think the other thing which we have, which I try and keep as simple as possible, is we have kind of like 3 pillars of what each business is trying to do, which is like, provide an exceptional customer experience in a safe, inspiring and sustainable environment delivered by remarkable people. And it's quite generic on there, but actually I use that. I use it every day when I'm talking to people as an overlay on everything, and you're out at camp, and I go, you know, is that a remarkable person? Not a good person or this. Are they going the extra mile? Are they, you know, totally customer focused? Yeah, and you know, or we're looking at the environment. You turn up at a venue, and I'll say, you know, is it genuinely that, you know, are we in an inspiring environment here? Or the easy thing is to forget sustainability. Something like the Bushcraft company can be, if he's not careful, relatively dirty, because it's got a lot of vans moving around and a lot of generators, and you're thinking, hold on guys, we've got to be careful here. So we use that as an overlay on all our businesses coming through, and our strategic direction and our strategic pillars for each of the businesses, because they all have their own individual little strategic plan. We'll start with that and go, well, what are we doing to make sure that our people are, you know, extraordinary?
We're all a product of our experiences in life, and so it probably, yeah, it definitely will have helped me. But you know, I wouldn't like to think that you had to have. I would hate to think to have trauma in your life in order to be able to be successful. You know, and I certainly think there's a lot of barriers to success for. You know, I think about young people or young adults with disabilities. You know, I mean, there's a long way to go in terms of it being equal representation at all levels throughout all companies. And to be honest, because of their experiences, they're bringing something. It might not be, you know, it's be different to my experiences, but they'll be bringing something special at their perspective. We need to make changes in this country and across the world, really, to make sure that all people can reach their full potential, you know, as young people, as young adults, and that they can, then they don't have to have some special resilience badge or some, you know, that they just can, you know, the opportunities are there for everyone to find their way, and they're encouraged, you know.
I agree with you. And in terms of any approaches to leading, so do you have anything that you've kind of developed over the years, or that you always utilize as your almost business philosophy or your way of leading an organization? Have you got anything that you'd be able to share with us?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I think if you asked my team that, they'd have a lot to say on it. Basically, probably the one fundamental thing that I do is I drive pace into an organisation. I work on the basis that if you don't go after things with pace, and it probably is from coming from the food industry and from the private sector where it's very, very competitive, that if you're not going after something with pace, you might never get there because you might overcomplicate it. You might design it in such a way that it's so perfect you can't actually do it. So pace is it really, and to, you know, when in your decisions, you know, when you're looking at your solutions, you're looking for ones that you can actually deliver in a reasonable time frame. So, and innovation really, to come at everything with a very innovative mindset. So, you know, we have lots of debates in the team, lots of lively conversations, and but we're always working at pace. I think that would be the one.
Oh, I love that. It's really transferable as well. Yeah.
Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate things, because that'll make it difficult to get there too. Keep your eye on the goal. That would be nice.
I think it's more than a theory, it's a lived experience of leading by example, inspired by my mother. Everything she did and asked of me, my brother, my sister, she led by demonstrating how it will be done and then expecting us to do it, learn, and when not sure, ask. And as I took those skill sets and then refined them in karate and then became an instructor and a coach while still competing and winning, you had to be able to react and respond. And my philosophy to leadership is very, very simple. It's a common sense approach. I have evolved from the School of Hard Knocks, the University of Life, a degree in common sense, and now an applied wisdom PhD in life. And life is about challenges and opportunities. It's about turning negatives into positives. It's about taking risk and turning it into reward. And that has to reflect real life experience, emotional intelligence. I believe in the emotional armor: see, smell, hear, feel, and taste. And then as you become a product of your environment, you need to weigh up the pros and cons of every issue you face in life. So whether I'm in a school, whether I'm in a corporate boardroom, I believe the same principle is applied, because we are all equal, just that society's diverse nature of what the social, cultural, economic, and even political influences might be determine in my view, that we all bleed red. Now, once you recognize that, once you identify the issue, you weigh up the pros and cons, you work out what the negatives are against positives. The negatives are always a positive waiting to happen. Look at where the alignment is, then identify the 7 things you need to do to overcome and resolve that issue. Once you've done that, the all-important Jeff Thompson leadership adage is positive, negative things happen in life because of people, personalities, and relationships. Therefore, you've got the issue, weighed up the pros and cons, you then find the right individuals at the right time, the right purpose of the 7 things you need to achieve. People always ask why 7, that's another.
I was just going to pick on that. Yeah.
It's spiritual, it's part of the equilibrium of 4 and 3 being 7, or 5 and 2 being 7. It's the formulas that you establish when you really start looking at this in depth. It doesn't have to be 7 things, it might be one significant task or goal that needs to be realized, but 7's your maximum. If you've gone beyond that, it will be too much for you to achieve and it will overwhelm you. Okay. You then, as I've said, look for the all-important people who will help you achieve, because individual leadership is only realized when you get collective leadership responsibility. So when you're building teams, complementary skill sets, the Great Britain team I led all had complementary skill sets, but we all wanted to win for Britain. And then we wanted to win from the communities we came from, the cities we came from, the families we came from, but that became that overall motivation. And once you have your inner circle, those you trust with your life, so simple as that. The outer circle, those who you can trust and have confidence in, and the outer circle, the periphery, people who you will work with, but wouldn't have the trust of your inner and outer circle selection of life journey.
Inner and outer circle, you're applying that to life in general as well then, right? So
absolutely. In an inner circle, an example of inner circle, you received a phone call, text, or email. My son, daughter, almost valuable, almost life priceless commodity of love and appreciation is going to arrive on your door. I can't explain why, but I will contact you soon. And in that time, I'm entrusting you with their lives or with the responsibility that I place on your doorstep. That's your inner circle. Your periphery are people that you can work with professionally, who understand philosophy, mission, objectives, and values, but you wouldn't have at your breakfast table. So who would you have at your breakfast table as part of your outer circle? And the periphery are people that you respect, would work with, would have a confidence and respect of what they might be able to do, but you would never trust them completely. It's very important in determining those relationships, because that will determine how you overcome the issue. And then finally, the time in which it needs to be developed and executed. Is it a day? Is it a week? Is it a month? 6 months? A year? Whatever it is, you set out the plan and you deliver. And my Common Sense Leadership book will be produced early next year. And it will simply just share with individuals what I've learned, what I've been inspired by, and what I believe I share in my everyday philosophy of common sense leadership excellence.
We all started from a unique place and follow our own journeys. Matt Young, Nigel Miller, Natalie Drazen share their experiences and their career journeys with us.
I'm really glad you asked that question, James. So we did a placement in university, and where we went into the school setting, and we had a alumni who had graduated before us, who was in the teaching setting, the teaching career, and basically pulled me aside and said, this isn't the place for you, because now they want to put us in a box and we're very limited on what we can do, creatively. It's very tough to challenge kids to be better. It's different. It's not like what it was when you came through the system and you might be disappointed. So that was basically the crossroads. I was devastated because that's what I had set out. I wanted to pay it back by paying it forward and do the same thing and be that same inspiration and mentor to young people that we had the pleasure of having ourselves. So that wasn't in the cards. So we got into private business and we looked at the market and we saw, the closest thing to that was the personal training market. And it was unregulated at the time. Everyone was just throwing up a shingle saying that we're a personal trainer, and not a very educated consumer. It was all about the girl or guy with the 6-packs. Since they have a 6-pack, they must be the best. And we came in and basically transformed that whole industry to be consumer centric. So it was all about the consumer, and it wasn't about losing 10 pounds or getting a bigger chest and bicep. Our whole X factor was about, what have you always wanted to do from a physical fitness standpoint that you've never tried? And what have you always wanted to do from a physical fitness and movement and activity standpoint that you don't think you're capable of doing? Once we got that answer, we put the wheels in motion and we took people through their own journeys. So it could be anything from a 5-kilometer run to a 10-kilometer run, marathon, half marathon, Berlin Marathon, Great Wall of China Marathon. We hiked in Iceland. Basically, if you came in and said you wanted to do something, we found 10 other people that wanted to do the same thing, and we combined it all. So
Love that. I'm guessing not many people came in and asked they wanted to go on the stepper or the treadmill for an hour a week.
No, it was all about us being a conduit to whatever your goals were, and we really prioritized the people. So things like an Ironman, you talk about that and you'd say, oh my God, I could never do that. It's so much time and I don't know what to do. But when you're doing it as a group, we would do it as a group with the focus being on that journey. We do a couple half Ironmans as a group where we travel together. You get to learn and know other people. We create community, and you'd complete the Ironman, and it wasn't about getting a world record time. It was about creating the journey. So we did that. It was awesome.
Massive. So we've got from big to small, but the co-op insurance in Manchester, I spent 7 years going there for so many months a year. ICI, co-op bank, insurance companies, just all over. But the big thing, what I got there was towards, I think it was the 4th, 5th year that I was there. In the summer, we got a chance to go on secondments to other departments, and they asked me what I wanted to do. And I said, I'd like to go to the marketing department. And everybody else went off to like insolvency or tax or somewhere else. I went, let's go to the marketing department. And while I was in there, I ended up doing some work for the senior partner. And I did. He enjoyed the work. He made a comment about the work. He said, oh, come and see me, at the end of the day. So I went to see him, and I'd literally just qualified at that stage, and he was telling me, what do you want to do? I said, well, I'd like to travel, and I'd like an overseas secondment. So we were looking at all the secondments, and you go to Australia or Bermuda and stuff. And I said, well, what is the most extreme weird one that you've got? He said, well, Africa, West Africa, the Gambia. The resident manager went, that's perfect. Oh, well, that's well done, because there's not many boys from Rochdale end up being the resident manager for KPMG in West Africa. So I literally went, that's the one I'm on, and I'm off. And about literally a month later, I'm sat in Banjul in the middle with me and one partner and 25 staff running audits across West Africa, in Guinea, Senegal, Mali. And it's just the most amazing experience. And that totally changed my outlook. I started traveling a lot. I think I tallied up at the end. By the time I finished with KPMG, I'd been to like 56 countries with them. And I did work in Australia. I've been all across Europe. I've been all over Africa, running courses, running audits and working for clients. And it built a resilience. I mean, running a professional services firm in Africa requires resilience to reach the standards that you need to be at. Basic things that we take for granted. You don't get your power turned off at 3:00 in the afternoon. You still have to get that report out, or the air conditioning breaks and you just can't work because it's just too hot. And it's interesting things, but it really broadened my perspective on there. And I kind of had a bit of a fork in the road at the end of that, because I got two opportunities. I could have gone back to be the partner in Africa, but a colleague that I'd worked with had gone to work for Coca-Cola and said they wanted a similar person to him, and I decided to go and do that, and then spent the next 2 years extensively traveling Africa, Middle East, working for Coca-Cola as a finance manager with there. So the travel piece, which has actually been a big thing with what I've done later on with expeditions, has been a big part of life, really.
And what the difference is, and in terms of working for someone like Coca-Cola, the biggest companies in the world, what do you gain from that? Obviously, there's a travel, but is it kind of viewing the operational efficiencies, like you're saying there, in terms of the challenges you're overcoming in working in like West Africa, like power going off, you're going to be really efficient to make sure there's no time to waste? Or what would you say the best learnings were you took from that?
Coke is an amazing business. But you look at something like, say, McDonald's, Coca-Cola, those businesses, they get an awful lot of bad press for certain aspects of their business model. But the ability to deliver at scale, at the standards that they operate, homogeneously across the got, is nothing short of remarkable. And I got to see how that basically worked, because audit is, people say audit and it's quite a dull, boring subject, but actually it is the business model, and you're in there in a business checking. So my job there was actually, when the internal audit came in from Atlanta and ripped these businesses apart and said, you're doing this wrong, you did this wrong, I worked for the CFO and went in before them to prepare and went in afterwards to tidy it all up and sort out the mess. So I love that. I kind of like mending things. I kind of like taking stuff that isn't working as well as it should do and improving it. But so Coke showed me two things. One, like the amazing standards that they've got. But secondly, it is a huge marketing organization. The biggest jobs in that company are marketeers, and some of the people they had there were just like phenomenal brains in that area. And it's funny because in Africa, it literally, like normal business, you're dealing with lots of different competitors, but certainly within the Middle East, which is where I worked, it was Coke v Pepsi, and it was literally kind of like, it's all like Man U played Liverpool every week and thinking like, right, how are we going to go and beat them? And or the left back's a bit weak, we'll go after him. It literally is like this. So they've brought this new product, we need to change this, and some real brains in there, especially around the marketing side, but just that operating at scale in especially in Africa, Middle East, difficult markets.
So I mean, that was, I guess, through the 90s in terms of KPMG and stuff. Coming into 2000, you're looking at, and I'm really interested to kind of get the backstory, Dynamic Commercial Finance, right? Was that your company at the time? You launched that and scaled it?
Well, no, it's quite a funny one, really. So I worked for KPMG, Coca-Cola, and within both of them, we got an opportunity because Coke, we were in Windsor and they wanted us all to move out to the Middle East. And I just settled in London. So I'd lived out of suitcases and bags and moved so much. I went, I've got some roots here, I'm staying. So I didn't. So I actually took redundancy and I came out and gave me an opportunity to then stand back and have a look. And I went back more into the traditional finance. I went into corporate finance. So I worked for a mid-tier accountancy firm called Horwath Clark Whitehill at the time. They've since changed and merged as accountancy firms do. And I was the manager. I turned up at an interview and I think, again, my CV intrigued the partners. They went, this guy's just different than what we've seen elsewhere. Next news, I was like the senior manager of the corporate finance team. So we're raising money for people. And the first set of clients that came through the door were 3 guys who'd been in invoice discounts and factory, turned up. They were coming out of a bigger business, wanting to start up on their own, and no finance director, obviously pretty financially numerate themselves. So I took them through. We raised, at the time, 25 million pounds when Bank of Scotland were very good at lending money to people, businesses. Bank of Scotland were excellent.
Before 2007 or whatever it was.
God bless the Bank of Scotland. And we put them on the AIM market and they had no finance director. And literally, I was trying to recruit my finance director at the time and saying, what about this guy? What about this guy? What about this guy? No. And it was the typical kind of city culture. We're in the pub on a Friday night with these guys. And I said, look, the worst case scenario, I'll be your finance director. I'll talk to the partners. I'll come in. I'll do 6 months with you and we'll just get this over the line. And they were like, next day, phone on, be serious on that. Let's do that. Let's do it. And I ended up spending 6 months at this corporate finance firm. And next news, 28, I'm the FD of a little listed business, new start. So there's nothing. We didn't have an office or anything. And then spent the next 4 years building everything.
That's a good question. The biggest one is that we cannot operate in silos. Right? It might seem like the experiences that I had were disparate, but I can find threads connecting them for sure. Road safety is not just about road safety. It's about air quality improvement. It's about healthcare costs. It's about economic opportunities and access to healthcare. When I was volunteering in Kenya, for example, it was really clear to me that some people couldn't get out of the small rural village that I was in to employment opportunities in the city because the roads were so bad or flooded during the rainy season that it was just impossible to move. Mobility was not a possibility. Some kids struggled to get to school because it was so dangerous. All of these things are interconnected. Roads are really the veins through which the health and the economy of our society flows. But in that same vein, years later, when I ran into my boss from this rural village in the halls of the UNGA, which was, a mind-blowing collision of 2 worlds, they paved the roads around this rural village. And what happened was that road traffic injuries among the kids went up. People were speeding. And they had paved these roads, but they hadn't put in provisions to slow cars down and to make sure that pedestrians and cyclists, and especially our kids who are so vulnerable, could walk safely. And that was why we saw this uptick. So it's a question of all of these different silos not being silos, right?
Yeah,
connecting,
for sure.
and also thinking about the ramifications, thinking ahead.
Yeah, when I wanted to be, I had this thing about wanting to be a woman in the man's world. I never took the easy route. So I joined a transport company as on the graduate training programme. Yeah, it was a great training program because I did all sorts of different stuff. But I was like the night shift in the frozen food warehouse at -26, with just a whole load of blokes picking orders. I mean, I didn't make it easy for myself, but I mean, I did really well there. I have to say that once they identified that I was actually very resilient and very determined and quite good at what I did, they promoted me very quickly, and I actually had a fantastic career. I've always done really, really well. And I know it's down to your own capability, but it's also down to the people around you giving the opportunities. And I felt very privileged that I got a lot of opportunities.
So in terms of transport, is that kind of haulage and logistics and distribution? Is that what the
Yeah, it
organisation
was all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So it was very unionised. So there was also, I learned a lot about the unions then, which, this is going back a long way in the 80s. It was very interesting stuff. And it stood me in good stead for everything that came after. I then moved on in the food industry and did lots of other stuff, ended up dealing with the supermarkets, being sort of commercial director, selling into the major multiples, which is really good experience. And then I was sort of ready, having done both operations and sales, to actually run organisations. So from then on, I basically operated as MD, chief exec, whatever, moving my way through.
Yeah, and sounds like it's quite a fast track into those roles. I mean, is that something that was rare back then in terms of moving up through the ranks quickly? And
I was always the only woman. Always, and I can't tell you, some of the stories would make you absolutely cringe about the things that were said and the way you were treated. But yeah, as I say, some of it played to my advantage as well. I mean, I'm a glutton for punishment. I love work. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? And I love to see results, and I love to see people flourish, and I like to make a difference. And there's nothing worse than if I'm in a job where I'm not making an impact. I'm trouble then.
Just create a clear vision and implement it. Sounds easy, but this can be one of the most challenging aspects of leadership. Charlie Hyman, Matt Young, Natalie Drazen, Jeff Thompson and Steve Baharrell share their mission with us and how they implement in their organizations.
And the first thing I'd say is I absolutely love what I do. So I'm excited to come in to work every day, which makes everything else easier, obviously. Yeah. I think also the fact that I'm young, I don't have a family to depend on, other commitments, it's also easier for me compared to a lot of others to put a lot more time into my work and not be compromising on other elements. So yeah, I do probably do more hours and spend more time on work than I probably should for a healthy personal life work balance, but again, I enjoy it and I'm learning and it works for me at the moment. The other thing is that my role evolves so quickly. So 6 months ago, my daily routine looked completely different from now. So for example, our whole academy program with teams in every age group or 2 teams in every age group, 7 coaches, all this sort of stuff. I meet with the manager of that program for 45 minutes a week. And other than that, basically let them get on with it because I trust them. They're amazing people. They do a great job. Whereas 6 months ago, I'm helping them with recruitment. I might fill in for a coaching session. I might order them equipment, all these sorts of things. So as we grow, I need to understand, or I'm starting to understand, that in order to do more, I have to be able to trust good people to actually run the programs and then just check in with them. And probably in a few months, we'll get to the stage where someone else checks in with them and I check in with that person because there's only so many management meetings I can have every week. But yeah, that is mostly my time in the day. It's coming into the office, it's chatting to people who are running the programs and helping them to get on with their jobs, supporting where they can. And then I'll probably do maybe an hour before people get in or an hour after to crack on with some of my own jobs.
So basically, when we had kids of our own, we had 2 boys, and when we showed up at the sports system on the sports scene, we found that it was exactly the same as the personal training business when we started. It was all about the celebrity coach with the celebrity parent, with their celebrity future Hall of Fame athlete, and the celebrity club. And we just said, there's more to sport than this. It's more than the standing, the score, and the schedules. That's not development. There's a great opportunity to develop culture, confidence, competence, character, and connection. We call those the 5 C's. And, it's just because a team beats another team 22-6 in a baseball game doesn't mean that coach is the better coach, doesn't mean that team's a better team. It just means that you've stacked a team in your community and you're creating chaos. So we kind of went in and said there's a different approach where sport is supposed to bring people together. That's the antithesis of that. That's the ethos of sport. It's about bringing people together. The Olympic rings aren't individual, they're overlapping. It's supposed to bring the best in the world together. And in your community setting, it's supposed to bring the community together. But what we were seeing was through all of the nonsense, sport was pulling the community apart. Everyone was in intellectual silos. You're competing against your neighbor. Your neighbor could afford to take your kid to the high performing club while you were at the regular club. So we started to see that and said, this is not what sport was meant to be. And we just try to implement bring the same business expertise, James, and experience that we had in our bricks and mortar business into the youth sports scene. That was our goal.
And I guess this is where having the we're going to talk about the operating system, but in terms of, there's a challenge, right? So you're working with, I'm assuming, volunteers predominantly in those clubs, so they don't have to be there if they don't want to, choosing to be there. How did that work? You're coming in disrupting, I'm assuming it was disrupting the status quo at that time. So what was the pushback initially?
It was as you would expect, particularly from the then leaders of the groups of sport. And I don't fault them because they didn't know what they didn't know. Nothing is left. You usually volunteer because your kid's in there, your kid's in the sport. So you follow them through their 4 or 5 years. When they're gone, you're gone. You get saddled with a whole bunch of policies and procedures that you have to follow. A lot of times it's not the volunteers with business experience. And I mean service business experience, because the business of sport is a business. And we keep having to remind people of that. Wherever there's a transaction of money for a product or service, you're running a business. And if you don't have business experience, if you don't have management experience, if you don't have people skills and experience, you're going to struggle to do good business, because there's going to be an expectation on the consumer side that's not being met on the organization side. And that's where we saw the biggest gap in sport across North America. It was being run by the least educated in terms of support, because there was no franchise operating system. There was no operating system that had been handed down from
with the governing bodies, etc. at the time. Was it just that wasn't on their radar? They just didn't work like that. It was just how it's always been, or were there some sports that was a bit more forward thinking, let's say, at the time?
There are the exceptions. There are some sports that are forward thinking, but I mean, we've traveled around the world. I've never seen an operating system come from a governing body. We call them national sport organizations here. I've never seen a national sport organization create an operating system outside of Canada Soccer that can actually be implemented at the grassroots level of sport. And that is your job as a governing body. It's not just to host the events and be the marketing company. That's one, and get eyeballs and visibility. That's one of your tasks. The other one is to create the operating system that makes it really easy for the grassroots level of sport to thrive, because that is where all of your initial experience, and that's the entry pathway to the high performance. We just want to turn around and say, most governing bodies just want to say, just give us your best performers. That's all we care about. Well, you're the most resourced, you're the most funded, you're the most visible, you have the most access to the latest science and data, and you have the most amount of capital. That's your job. Create the operating system that makes it easy for the grassroots level people to survive. Otherwise, you get the least educated in terms of support and the most self-interested people operating with no checks and balances at the entry point to the sport pyramid.
My career path is one that really taught me that it is possible to land your dream job. As a kid, I was raised to be aware of the fact that I was privileged and that most of the world suffered challenges I was fortunate to never experience. Being raised in this way fostered a desire to help as many people as I could. In college, I learned that public health does just that, which is why I majored in it. I started to become involved in road safety because of a tragedy when a sorority sister was hit and killed by a drunk driver on her way to school. I didn't think that road safety was really a career path, though. It seemed too niche, too unattainable. So I worked as a leadership fellow with the Pew Charitable Trusts once I graduated, where I focused on children's dental Medicaid services. I really didn't know that lots of kids miss school because of things as preventable as cavities. It was a formative experience, but it really bugged me that I was sitting in a beautiful, expensive building, working on this issue without ever having set foot in a dental clinic, serving the exact population that I was trying to help. So I did a 180 and volunteered with the American Jewish World Service in Kenya, working and living alongside community health workers on issues ranging from HIV/AIDS prevention to microfinance and gender-based violence. And that was really a life-changing experience. It taught me to learn with humility and to truly value and defer to the expertise of people on the ground. It also taught me that there was only so much that I could accomplish without funding. So I decided to chase the money and go work for Accenture Consulting, where I thought I could have a bigger impact. Accenture was a really good boot camp on how to work with clients and provide value. But I knew that I wanted to follow my mom's very good advice to get 2 master's degrees by the time I turned 30. And the clock was ticking. So I did this because, she pursued higher education while she raised me. And I can imagine that that was really difficult. And she enjoyed the ability to switch from one area of expertise to the other thanks to having several degrees. So I went back to Hopkins to pursue my MPH MBA, very fortunately with a full scholarship. And I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Initially, I went back with the intention of pursuing international health. And I remember coming home one day and asking my boyfriend at the time, is it really possible to get paid to do what you love? You seem to love your job, so how'd you do that? And he gave me 2 very good bits of advice. First, go find the profile of the person whose job you want and network your way to that person. Pull the student card, ask them for informational interviews. And second, figure out what organizations you need to work for to get there and take advantage of being in school to do internships at those organizations while you complete your degree. This seemed like a lot, but I did that and I learned as much from my internships as I did from my classes. Oh, I also married my then boyfriend, and I think that helps too. When I was in grad school, I worked for the National Transportation Safety Board and the World Health Organization with the intent of pursuing global road safety after that conversation. And I networked my way to my predecessor, Bella Denzar, who had just been appointed to be a board member of the NTSB. So she was looking for a replacement, and Bella trusted me with her job. So that's really 3 bits of advice, right? First, use the student card, do those informational interviews. I got that NTSB internship through a cold call that I placed to the agency when I was collecting data for a paper in school. You really never know what's going to come of it, but you have to be courageous and pick up the phone and talk to strangers sometimes. Second, network. Good jobs really often aren't posted online, and great jobs are the ones where you are the one writing your own job description. And third, to the extent you can, chase your dreams. I say to the extent you can because I recognize that sometimes this is really hard for financial reasons or time constraints. But if you can find the time, do volunteer work in the field that you want to go into and then leverage that to find a way in. Sometimes if you look for the unorthodox ways to get there, you can find that path to your dream job.
Wholeheartedly agree. I mean, again, Muhammad Ali, in 65, becoming world champion the way he did, in the ring, out of the ring, an activist, an icon, working with the Muhammad Ali Centre, meeting Muhammad Ali in 1988, then working with the late President Mandela in post-apartheid South Africa. I realized I was a very blessed individual in that the people I saw visually struggling for that equality of purpose and of their people that they represented, now almost globally respected because they had stood firm and consistent to that vision, mission, and set of ideals and values that would become common in the diversity of engagement. And I've learned you have to pay a price of struggle and pain in order to ascend into that very unique, I consider to be global, iconic club. I think you're quite right. We don't have the Muhammad Alis, we don't have the Mandelas, we don't have the Kofi Annans, but we do have the legacy. And the legacy of their efforts, again, something I feel very fortunate to have been able to have met all 3 and many others that I saw and then inspired me. And I think maybe that's why I believe that whilst I was the best known unknown, I'll be known for what I've done, inspired by the shoulders that I stand upon, and then hopefully with others become shoulders that our current generation and future generations will be inspired enough to stand on our shoulders. So that's why the Youth Charter, the Social Coach Leadership Programme, why I'm now Deputy Chair of Birmingham 2022, at a time where, as we know, when May 25th happened and George Floyd was murdered, I took a step back from public life. I had fought hard and been fighting Since the age of 7, you get tired, you get battle weary, you take a step back. That global moment in time challenges you personally, professionally, and spiritually, and then it's time to get back into the fight. So that's what I'm doing now, and bringing those lessons, those life experiences, those inspirational, global, iconic leaders who ridiculed, considered terrorists, do you understand me, traitors, now fondly missed, but very much reflected in. And again, social media is providing a wonderful reservoir of information. So when I meet a group of young teenagers and I say Mandela and they look at me in a inquisitorial way, or Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or Maya Angelou or Angela Davis or Mandela or Muhammad Ali, I just ask them to go to Google.
Yeah.
And they go to Google and then their eyes light up. And from doing their Xbox, I've seen this, they've been there for now an hour. And then they're questioning what was said by any means necessary, as opposed to 50 Cent, get rich or die trying. It's how we engage, it's how we stimulate their discussions. And rather than using their thumbs so quickly, I'd like them to use their thumbs to inform them, and then a balanced and I think healthy debate that can stimulate their mental, physical, and emotional health, well-being, and safeguarding, because that information of power safeguards them, because they will still be stereotypically and societally placed in either a box ticked or a label that only they can emancipate themselves from individually and collectively.
Would be Mr. Bell. We'll probably talk a bit about this, but I spent sort of 10 years working in PE and school sport, aside from sort of professional football coaching at Newcastle United Academy. And for those 10 years, I was based in a sports college, Benfield, in the East End of Newcastle. And the head teacher was a former PE teacher. And he kept going about, Mr. Bell was my favourite PE teacher. He said, he was rubbish. I guess he wasn't rubbish, man. So this PE teacher basically, he never taught with PE, but he was a deputy head teacher of a small school in the East End of Newcastle. Now, bearing in mind, like the East End of Newcastle is in like the lowest 0.5% areas of deprivation in the country. Didn't have anything. You know, he didn't know he didn't have anything because everyone had nothing. But he just provided loads of opportunities to play football. So, you know, he had a dog called Tess, did the school choir, so everyone was in the school choir. He was involved in the Cubs, everyone was in the Cubs. You couldn't misbehave at school because you couldn't get all these amazing football opportunities. And he was involved in like Newcastle City Boys. So like back in the day in the 80s and 90s, representing city or your county for football was like pre-academy football. It was like the thing. You just get a lovely little tie and you've got to go to school early on a Wednesday. And he was like the gateway to all of that. So I used to have this conversation with the head teacher at the sports college. So we didn't teach anything. I said, no, but like he just provided so much opportunity. And I would never put a foot wrong in school because I didn't want to upset Mr. Bell.
Does that disappoint me? I didn't want to disappoint him. Yeah.
Didn't want to. Unfortunately, he died a few years ago, and he was probably my best day at school. Was like the day I got to take my swimming trunks and my bag, or you got to do like cross country. I mean, God, you couldn't get away with a safeguard. Now we used to cross country and like what we were doing 4 and 5. You had to like run from the school, like around the community, through a graveyard, through the church walk shopping centre. Back to school, and he would stand at the gate with a mug of coffee.
But so he just send you off, yeah?
Off you go, lads, aye?
Right.
And like loads of lads would cheat. I'll get dead frustrated because I'd do it properly, and loads of lads would cheat and that, and they'd come back and they'd get a clip off Mr. Bell because you just can't do like a mile in like 3 minutes when you're like 7.
So they just did the half loop or something?
Yeah, they went straight back with the gyms. They weren't messing around. I'd come back lathered in sweat about 10 minutes later. But it was so Mr. Bell that I, like looking back, so I'm involved in non-executive director for the Trust of Schools in the East End of Newcastle now. And it's largely because like he championed that, and that was my best day. And that like, I don't think I would have been naughty to go anywhere, but I would like had a reason to be on task, on time, have good behaviour. And he had that eye on you. And like, there's loads of kids who weren't very good at football, were in the same sort of mold. So I think, and I didn't start playing football really until I was like 8 or 9. And my boy started now and he's 5. But that was my earliest memory. And it's become a really important part of why I do what I do now and why I'm on the board of the Neat Academy Trust, just because there'll be other toe rags like me who need to run around, to have to move. And
well, that's one of the things, I'll probably get into it as well, but that's one of the things where that physical activity or just that outlet of activity or be able to run around and focus on something else does impact the academics as well, doesn't it? Even just the engagement, if someone's not as engaged in the classroom,
fundamentally, like, I'm not a scientist, but like there's a lot of blood getting pumped to your brain. Like, that's not a bad thing, is it? Like, that whole blood and oxygen getting pumped to your brain. And there's loads of clever people that tell you about the correlation between physical activity and achievement. In that time, up until 2011, when you had the Youth Sport Trust championing all of the school sports colleges, the majority of those school sports colleges were high performing because they had kids who were doing extra hours of high quality PE and physical education. And like, it's like in life, and if you want anything done, give it to a busy person and they'll get it done. Yeah. So, I spend a lot of time, I'm invested in that. And like, every kid I know in a primary school loves to run as fast as they can run. Like, they all have a top speed, don't they? And like, at some point that gets beat out of you, but they all just like running and chasing each other, and it's fun. So I think, I wasn't bad at school, but I didn't care for anything else. But if you could let us run around or climb the apparatus or jump in a swimming pool, I came to life. And that was my version. And there'll be other kids whose version might be like making something or designing something or the art or culture. But so that's my earliest memory would be Mr. Bell.
But did you ever get a chance to speak to him about that and like kind of
if I did, no,
let him know like what impact he made on you?
No, he has absolutely no idea. And there'll have been hundreds of kids who came through that school in the East End of Newcastle that he had an influence on because he just provided that structure. Now, he was pretty tough as well. He was like quite an imposing guy.
Yeah.
Big deputy head teacher. So you didn't want to upset him anyway, but he had that carrot and it was football. And like in Newcastle, football's religion. Like there's no other sport. Like a lot of the PE curriculums didn't have any other sport in it. So the only thing looking back where we are now then is like no girls played football then. That wasn't a thing. Didn't exist. And now there's loads of girls playing football. So like more, you could have had that impact on the majority of the school if the girls' football in the
the culture is slightly different. But yeah, if it was
in the 80s, if they had the culture you got now and the role models, that might have been different. But that's actually, as a regret, I never got to have that conversation with him. And he, like I say, unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago. Yeah, that was an important sort of part of my growing up.
Operational challenges come in all shapes and sizes. Nigel Miller explains how he approaches turning around a business's fortunes, while Matt Young and Lisa Wainwright outline what best practice looks like for sports administration.
So the whole thing on this, the end-to-end, so it was 3 years. So when I came in, he said it was going to make, I think it was 750 grand. And when I finished the numbers, we'd lost 250 on there. So we were losing 250 and it had lost 250 year before. So it was in a real problem. And he had a $1.5 million overdraft with a personal guarantee against his house on there, the whole lot. So over that 3 years, we improved the performance to the point we sold to $1 million profit and got his guarantee back in the meantime. So he wasn't like, his house wasn't hurt. And we did a little MBO in between, which is where I became an owner, because that was the other thing with this. The other thing with owners when you go in, it's like they always go, "Yeah, well, come in, have a bit of the business to incentivize you." And as an accountant, it's always like, "Well, yeah, but you've got to go and sort it out and make it happen. Do all the schemes and stuff to put it in place." So I did, and then they're all. As soon as you do that, it's like, "Oh, did we say it was that much?" Yes, we did say it was that much. It totally was that much, yeah. and it was that much. Remember when he was losing 250? So let's just remember that. Anyway, so good to his word, we did that, and then eventually we sold. So we sold at $1 million profit, and I then at that point, so I'd become the FD. I was then the COO, so I was running the business day to day for me. So he wasn't involved in the business, and there was a sales director and an ops director, and me, and then a team underneath. And we had at the time, I think we had about 140 working for us, and we're in the UK working with 600 schools on there. So it's quite a sizable business. And then we sold to TUI, and I sort of worked out a new plan that I wanted to do. At the same time, we were doing gap years, we were doing UK-based work, but we actually wasn't very good at some of those other areas, but we were very good at the expeditions. So we did the sale. I became the MD of the business. We were owned by TUI. Were great, especially for the first year, 18 months as owners.
Was that like I know you stayed on, was that like I call it an earn-out or whatever? Did you have to stay on, or was it one of them? Yeah,
no, well, so I've done, somebody once told me, especially because I've been through corporate finance, I went, don't do earn-outs, don't get tied in, you need to sort of, anyway, so from not doing an earn-out, I got tied into a 5-year earn-out, which is probably the longest earn-out I've ever heard, ever. And I had to get the numbers from $1 million to $5 million. To get the next piece on there. I mean, the nice story at the end of it, I got it to $5 million on there in the next few years, and it all worked out.
Sounds like, I was going to say, it sounds like a burnout. No, not that one, 5 years.
But it was at the end. It was really good at the start, and then I hated it at the end. But I'll come on to that just in a second. But so we went through this, sold, and I changed the strategy. And I went, right, look, we're going to be really good at expedition. Stop this, but we're going to go global. So we had Australia, set up in the Middle East, with an office in Boston, which they had at the time that I joined, but it was very small. And we started sending to American schools. We grew the business. At the end, Australia was the same size as the UK on there. So it was a good strategy for that period. I mean, if you look in the middle of COVID, being very, very focused on a business that involves a lot of travel overseas, it looks like a really bad strategy. But actually, for the rest of the time, it worked. It worked fine. So yeah, so I did that, and then it's like all big companies when they buy you. It's a bit different here on this, and I'll explain how I structured it at Active Learning Group differently when we did this deal. But they start meddling, or they start going, actually, we think you should do it like this. And go, right, really, based on what? And show me, well, we just think it's similar to this business and that, well, it's not similar to that business. And actually, it's quite a very, very specific business. So we mentioned earlier, talking, you've got to be very open-minded. And I was extremely flexible and open-minded. But at the end, it just became, I work hard and I like working hard, but it just became a real slog. And every day you kind of feel like you're fighting. So we'd done the earn out, and they got to the end and said, look, at the end of the day, this is your business now. You can run it as you want. So I did 6 months handover, and just thought I need to go and find a new challenge and move on. And I wanted to not stay in that one business and just grow. I wanted to go and do other things. So I came out with the intention of investing, but actively investing within smaller businesses. So I'll take an equity stake, but I'd be involved in the management teams, not on a full-time basis, but like assisting and coaching and doing, certainly on the finance side and in a number of businesses.
Yeah, well, thank you for asking that, because there are a lot of people doing good things too, and they should be recognized. Australia has done a really great job of baking sport, activity, and movement into lives of people, into their population. So they've done really well. Look where they sit at the Olympics, at any Olympics, and especially the Summer Olympics. Look where they sit. They punch way above their weight in terms of population. New Zealand has done a really good job of connecting sport and school, and they focused on that for the last 5 years. It's been a 5-year endeavor to connect the communities in terms of sport and school, because they become disconnected, and they're really trying to impart on people, listen, it's about the process, enjoy the journey. Stop putting so much emphasis on the outcome. The UK GAA is doing a great job of kind of operationalizing what they call the human development model. And they really want to use the science. They're doing a good job at using the science to steer the coaching and to steer the messaging that's going to different people. The PGA of America, I would suggest, is the organization that's doing the best job in North America in terms of realizing that it needs to be fun. And if it's not fun, you're not going to have people invest time in all of these sports, and really going right down to the coaching level and saying, this is how you coach character, confidence, competence. As you know, James, a lot of coaches focus on the physical and technical tactical competence, and that's it. They don't know how to foster connection and nurture and develop character in their young athletes. And the PGA is doing a great job of doing that, as is USA Hockey, as is USA Lacrosse. Canada Soccer has taken big strides forward in terms of a holistic athlete development model and club licensing, so that we're trying to get some consistency within how soccer is run in this country. So those are all examples. I'm sure there's many more, so I apologize if I'm leaving people out. Norway, who wins an Olympics and then goes and asks for consulting about, how to deal with some issues that haven't even shown up yet. So, the Scandinavian countries do a fantastic job of keeping sport local and avoiding the whole high performance and travel team trap. So there is a lot of great ideas and talent and expertise coming around the globe. It just hasn't really been consolidated into one, here's what we're doing and here are the results.
People are people, and I think there are still many challenges and many more challenges as society has changed. I just look at my two girls who are 8 and 9, trying to get them off their iPad is not the easiest task on earth. I think I could probably visit the Queen and have lunch easier than getting them off their iPads. But I think a lot of things have changed in terms of investment into the sector from the sector. It's not in terms of local authority funding. That has definitely been reduced, and more recently for obvious reasons. And there needs to be a significant drive to increase the amount of investment into local authority facilities in particular and provision. But I think the challenge for me is that we saw, 20, 30 years ago, a huge birth of the sports development sector, majority of which were through local authorities and a couple through governing bodies. There's now a significant number in governing bodies that are highly funded or commercially operating, and hardly any in local authorities because of those cuts. So there's been a real shift in the workforce. But I think over those, 20 plus years, we've professionalised as a sector. Simsbury is obviously has now been launched through a combination of other previous bodies, and the profession has got chartered status. A lot more people are aware of the profession, would look to come into the profession as such. But there are still many, many challenges if you just look at the active people stats in terms of, the diversity of people who are taking part in sport and physical activity. We've not cracked it. And I think the new strategy from Sport England is starting to do that. But you can't do it on the budgets that we're operating off. It is near on impossible. I think for me, we've still got a long way to go around prevention, and hopefully through the last year or so, people have started to understand about the importance of physical and mental health. We hear it all the time, and it's time for us, and part of what the Alliance does is work with government to identify areas that we can cross different departments to provide solutions, rather than solutions being provided to the sector that quite honestly are not going to work.
Establishing a healthy routine can support your performance and mental health. Lisa Wainwright and Steve Beharrell explain their approach.
First thing, my daily briefing is my first thing. I then come down to my office and got in the garden because I'm working from home, and I do 30 minutes on my bike, which is then looking at, again, continuing to see all the media and deciding what we might respond to and what we might not respond to. Then it's kind of looking at emails, but majority of which is then putting your time between external work, internal work, and keeping your pulse to say on broader external work, as in not Alliance, but then broader. What opportunities am I linking into that's not connected to sport that could give me a different angle? So it might well be international LGBTQI work, for example, that I might be speaking at a conference or attending a conference virtually to learn. And I've always, on my career, I've tried to have one day that's a my day, because I've always found, you're too busy answering emails and always being there for people, and you can't create that thinking time. So as I say, I've always tried to have one lighter day that sounds crazy, you might be doing your shopping, but you don't turn off being a CEO. You're just thinking, and I always say, how does Sainsbury's know that I eat Yoplait yogurts and send me a voucher? Why can't ECB know that I want to play cricket and send me a voucher next week? It's kind of those.
You get those ideas just popping up from being a different.
Exactly. And we'll try that, and we'll try this. So that's the other thing I've tried to do. And then finally, in terms of some of the more senior roles, I've always had a personal boardroom, which some of your members might have heard of. Dr. Zelda King is famous for inventing this, which is a group of people that I will use at different times, whether they're a mentor, a coach, an anchor. So if I'm struggling, if my confidence has gone, I've got a real challenge, I'll go to my anchor and I'll say, Wainwright, you've done this before, you're cool, you're great, you can deliver it, let's go through it again. It might be a challenger when I'm cruising and I've just got up at 10 o'clock and I've only got one meeting. And my challenger will say, that's not the role of CEO, Lise. So there's a whole group of 12 people within this personal boardroom that I will utilise at different times depending on what I need at that time. So it's much broader than a mentor and a coach. It's very specific in terms of their skill sets and how they support me. And I found that in both leadership and board positions incredibly useful. I had to do an awful task in one of the boards. I was petrified. And the anchor at the time that I was working with just said, right, sit there, we're going to role play it. And it sounds really silly, but role playing it took me through it and made it so much easier because I'd already practiced it, which in sport you always practice before you do it. But to practice before you go into a boardroom and physically sit in a boardroom and practice it just seemed odd, but it works. So as I say, now I have this personal boardroom that helps me hopefully keep on track, she said.
I think at the top of my working week, the one thing that I protect every week is me coaching on a Friday night. So I still coach at Newcastle United Academy on a Friday night. I do an hour and a half, sometimes 5 to 6:30, or do 2 sessions 5 to 8. So the lads who've identified who might be close to academy football, but they need to come to the development centre. And because I've been at academy for that long, I've kind of got an idea of what the standard is. So, but I leave work at 4 I drive to the academy, and then by 6:30, I'm a happy man. I go home happy every Friday because there's just some kids who I've tried to give them a really fun, interesting learning experience with a ball rolling around. So I think if I didn't have that, my Friday would become Saturday, Sunday, back into Monday. So I've kind of...
Yeah, so that's kind of sets the tone for your weekend, gives you that decompression.
Yeah, and I think I plan it that way, but I know that's what I get out of it. So like, if I'm honest, it's 50% for the kids, it's 50% for me. But I think me enjoying coaching, I'll hopefully provide a good opportunity for the lads who are there. And I kind of keeps us out the pub a couple of hours as well on a Friday night. And I'm happy when I get home, and I feel like I've started a weekend. So, and I've also realised people have got a contract where it's 35 or 40 hours a week, and I want people to do their job in 35 or 40 hours. I don't want them to do it in 50 or 60.
Yeah.
That's not realistic sometimes when you're leading an organisation, but that's the job, and that's what we need to be able to do. I'm not expecting anyone to do 60 or 70 hours a week, and that's not the job. If that's the case, we need to have a look at what you're doing and how you're doing it. So I think there's a few fundamentals there, and I think if people enjoy their work, like, that's absolutely crucial and significant. And I think that comes back to the culture that the staff create, and creating this new building, Newcastle, and the fact that we haven't been together for so long, getting people back together and connecting with each other is going to be a key part of sort of pulling us back through COVID and back to this new version of the old foundation, the type of activities we need to do. So I think I could spend all week with staff, but the reality is that you can't run a business like that. So I think I've got to try and protect some of that, but absolutely trust the people across the senior management team and the guys to fully resource those guys, the staff who are front line. And if we're not about that, we can't be about anything else, because that's the secret success, is that James, who's out there in the classroom, feels empowered. And you know what you also get with that? You don't get, like, when there's an issue, or speak to my boss, or that's not our policy, they just fix it.
Yeah.
They try and go, no, but this is why, or can I help you else? Or you get a totally different service, and then people feel like they've got some ownership for where we're going, and they take real pride in it. So that's what we're trying to be about. And the thing about my week is it's so varied, like really varied. Every week is completely different, other than some of the meetings that I have to attend with my team. Like, it could be anything every week. So it's a really privileged position to be in terms of representing the club across the community.
Charlie Hyman gives his advice for any entrepreneur starting out. Natalie Drazen and Jeff Thompson give advice to their younger selves.
Probably two. One would be, people think running your own business is flash and fun and exciting. It's double as stressful, double as much work as most other jobs. So if you're up for that, great.
You try and put them off it.
No, if you're up, that's great, but don't go into it thinking, oh, I'm going to make a load of money, I'm going to get someone else to run it, I don't have to do much, I can kind of pick when I work.
Jump on the private jet and fly around.
Yeah, exactly. It's all hours work. It's incredibly stressful. It consumes your mind 24/7. So be prepared for that. And the second thing I'd say is, don't worry if you feel like you don't think you have the skills or know what you're doing at any one time. Even the top people make decisions where they're not fully clued up on what they're doing. There's always an element of intuition, of learning as you go along, of finding out things as you go along, of speaking to people for help. So yeah, do what you think's best at that time. I still haven't got this is the milestone I'm aiming to reach. This is our clear vision and objective. It's a case of, someone asked me this today, do I think that's right? Yes, no. Is this an opportunity we want to take? Obviously, as you grow, these decisions become bigger and more important. But yeah, basically go with the flow and don't get stressed if you think, I don't know anything about this. Go and find out about it, or find someone to help you who does.
There's three things. Take risks, opt for experience rather than prestige, and don't let people push you down. So taking risks. The most formative experiences that I had were the ones that scared me. Whether it was volunteering on an Indian reservation at 16, or biking across the country at 21, or living in Kenya at 23, those experiences really pushed me beyond my comfort zone, and they forever changed my perspective on life. They helped me discover parts of myself that I would not have known otherwise. Now, I'm not saying that you should take unreasonably dangerous risks, right? You have to weigh them responsibly, but take the ones that you can, and take advantage of being young and not being tied to one particular place or thing or person. The second one is opt for experience. The experiences that helped me grow were really the ones where I was given responsibility, maybe even more responsibility than I should have had. From running my college public health journal to being a reporter for my local TV news station because they were short-staffed, I learned the most when I was given room to grow and also room to fail, right? Those were the experiences that I rely on most to this day. And it's not as much the experiences that I had at the organizations with the name recognition. So take advantage of being young, again, to put yourself in a position where you can comfortably fail and use that as a learning experience. And the third thing is an important one. Don't let people push you down, because along the way, people will try to push you down. My first boss was hopefully the most challenging one that I will ever have. She actively tried to prevent me from succeeding and from growing. And rather than letting her negative perspective hold me back, I learned from it and I became a stronger professional and person in general. I also learned how not to lead. So I think the best way to overcome an experience like that is to really use it as a foundation to succeed. And the best way to get back at a boss who wants you to fail is to excel.
I would advocate that you take children to funerals to experience the whole experience of loss. And I would have said, had I not attended that whole experience as the result of the loss of my father, and different cultures have different approaches, I think to have put a child through that experience was a traumatic one and had a profound impact on me for a number of years, of which I'm still getting to grips with, where I can be comfortable in my skin. So the advice I would have given myself at the time would have not to have gone to my father's coffin, to have explored him in his cold, lifeless state, and to be haunted by it for so many years, but equally inspired by it as I came to know him for what he did, what he achieved in fighting for this country, me representing this country, now serving in public life. So again, it will always be spiritual. At such a young age, don't place yourself in such unusual and extraordinary settings where you don't understand it and the impact it can have upon you. And to retain the innocence of youth, which means you never grow up, which for a lot of the male species we never do anyway. So I suppose from that standpoint, I'm still work in progress by God's sense of humour.
Thank you for listening to this week's show. You can subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can write to us at dryphase.podcast@coordinate.cloud, tweet us at coordinatesport, or follow us on Instagram at coordinate_sports, or on my account at James_Ventures. This episode was produced by Nancy Kwamboka, with support from Claire Goodchild and Lola Small, with special thanks to Rochelle. I'm James Moore, and you've been listening to The Drive Phase from Coordinate Sport.